From Eyewitness News, this is Newsmakers.
Less than 3 weeks until primary day, and the Democratic race for governor is tight. In our exclusive Eyewitness News Providence Journal poll, we asked 500 likely Democratic primary voters who they would vote for if the election were held today. Gina Raimondo now leads with 32% of the vote, followed by Angel Taveras with 27%, and Clay Pell has made major gains, now polling at 26%. Todd Giroux garnered just 1% of the vote. 13% of those we polled say they still aren't sure. The survey comes with a margin of error of 4.38%. This week on Newsmakers, a complete breakdown of the new Eyewitness News Providence Journal poll with our political roundtable.
Welcome to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White. Joining me on the roundtable this week, to my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi and Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. And to my left, we welcome back Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming and assistant managing editor at the Providence Journal, Tim Murphy. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me.
Good morning.
It's good to have you. And before we dive into the poll results, we have some major news in the race for mayor of Providence. Late Thursday night, WPRI.com reporter Dan McGowan broke the news that Democrat for Mayor Brett Smiley was dropping out of the race and throwing his support behind former housing court judge Jorge Elorza for the September primary. While Smiley will remain on the ballot, the race comes down to two major candidates, Elorza and City Council President Michael Solomon. Ted, talk about what's happening here and why he made that decision.
You know, if you think about Brett Smiley, he is, his base, his people are the liberals on the east side of Providence, Murph York, David Cicilline, folks like that. And their priority in this year's Providence mayoral election is to stop Buddy Cianci from winning again. That's what David Cicilline didn't know too. They don't want it to happen again. I think Brett Smiley spent the last 2 months trying to become the anti-Cianci candidate, see if he could win the Democratic primary that way. And all indications from Dan McGowan's reporting is that the polling was coming back and showing he just wasn't getting traction. He was splitting the vote with Jorge Elorza. Jorge Elorza, I think these folks think, could potentially put together that same East Side Latino coalition that elected Cicilline, that elected Taveras, and so Brett Smiley's made a decision that for the good of Providence, he thinks he needs to get out and back Elorza over Mike Solomon, who they think can't beat Cianci.
Joe, how big a problem is it that Brett Smiley is physically still on the ballot? Would this have been more effective if they'd made the decision earlier?
There's no question. It would have been more effective if his name was not on the ballot. However, a few months ago, as Ted said, Brett Smiley still thought he could win the Providence mayoral primary. I think he realizes now, I can't win it. I feel that Elorza will be the strongest candidate to run against Buddy Cianci if we want to stop him. So I'm going to support him. But I think Brett Smiley has to, over the next 2 weeks, do a lot of campaigning for Elorza, showing his people, don't vote for me, vote for Elorza, because he's the one that can beat Buddy Cianci. My name's on the ballot, but don't vote for me. But he will still get some votes, no question.
I mean,
and it will hurt.
He's also going to need to convince them, and don't vote for Mike Solomon. Michael Solomon, the city council person, is not going to take this lying down and just cede all of Smiley's votes to Jorge Elorza.
Well, he'll work on the east side now, very much, I would think, Michael Solomon. Try to get some inroads there.
The ballot on September 10th is still going to have the same number of people despite this decision. You're going to have the Democratic nominee, and you're going to have the Republican nominee, and then you're going to have Buddy Cianci. Are they right, the folks that are making the decision behind the scenes here, Arlene, that a vote for Mike Solomon is a vote for Buddy Cianci?
Yes.
Is there, and that's it? Okay, well then let's move on to the governor's race.
Shut down by the former Attorney General once again.
That's why she's here. Let's talk about how things have changed from our poll in May to the poll that we just released here in August. A big jump in the polls for Clay Pell. We saw in May, we had 12% for Clay Pell. That jumped to 26% in our most recent poll. Gina Raimondo also saw some improvement, going from 29 to 32, and Angel Taveras dropped from 33 to 27. So beside the lead change, you know, obviously here the big story is Clay Pell. And we also want to take a look at his favorability ratings. Those jumped considerably between May and our most recent poll. This is sort of like a PowerPoint presentation. He went from 35% in May up to 50%. Again, this is the favorability rating when we ask the opinion. What do you think of the candidate? And this is Clay Pell obviously making huge inroads here. Look, we can talk about why that happened in a moment, but Joe, when you look at some of the crosstabs, I think my big question here is, with the deeper look at the data, is there room for growth for Clay Pell, or has he hit his ceiling?
Well, I think there is still room. However, I think it's going to be a lot more difficult now for Clay Pell to keep moving forward. For example, he only received 21% of the independent voters in the race for governor. The other thing is, when you look at the voters that are not sure who they're going to support for governor, 57% have a positive opinion of Gina. 48% have a positive opinion of Angel. But with Clay Pell, only 29% have a positive opinion, 35% unfavorable, and 35% still don't know. So there's going to be a lot more work for Clay Pell. I think moving up from here is going to be harder. Not impossible, but a lot harder for him to do.
And Tim, when we look at the why this happened, particularly with Clay Pell, is the answer here money?
I think that's
money?
a big part of the answer, certainly. This is shaping up to be one of the most expensive races in Rhode Island history in terms of the governor campaign. Gina Raimondo spent over $3.5 million. Clay Pell, $2.7 million. And certainly that money buys a lot of commercials on TV, on the radio, that just portray him as an outsider, as someone who's different from the other people that are running, as a fresh face, all of those things that help boost his rating and his favorability rating. Angel Tavares, on the other hand, simply hasn't been able to keep up with that spending. He spent about $1.7 million. And that is a lot of money, but not compared, that's only half of what Gina Raimondo has spent.
And Arlene Pell has sort of pledged that he's not going to go negative here. Do you think he can stay true to that as we come down the stretch here?
I think first of all, he blocked himself into that position, so he's at the point of no return.
So it was a mistake.
Probably yes, but by the same token, it's very difficult to go negative for the two other contenders right now. It's hard for a woman to do negative advertising. That's why she used surrogates like, men to hit Tavares. Tavares has to be careful too, and you have to be careful, like you don't look like you're beating up on a woman, etc. So they have to do a scalpel approach to their negative ads, I think, or it's going to backfire.
But at this point, Angel doesn't have too much choice, but he has to go negative. We saw that even before the poll came out. A pure negative commercial on both Gina and Clay Pell.
The quality of it, right?
Exactly. The quality. And the thing to be careful of is when you go negative with a three-person race, the person who doesn't go negative could benefit, because you might bring your opponent's number down, but you may not necessarily get that vote. They might say, well, I don't like her attacking him or him attacking her, so maybe Clay Pell is the person I want. And I think that's been Clay Pell's strategy all along.
Yes.
It's risky, but right now it has him in the race.
Ted, you wrote a piece in July that Clay Pell may be surging, and you got a few comments of Ted Nisi, are you nuts? But you were right. Did you have the crystal ball there, or what?
No, I think it's like Tim Murphy said. I mean, you spend this much money, it would be almost impossible not to move up in the polls. Particularly, Gina Raimondo and Angel Tavares, they highlight the differences in their biographies. They highlight their somewhat different approaches to pension reform, but they are not massively different candidates, in terms of policies, in terms of what they say they support. And so I think there were a lot of Democrats who felt like they wanted a more progressive, more liberal alternative. People, you see what the NEARI did and everything. They just didn't want either of the Raimondo or Angel Tavares teams to get into the governor's office, and they saw Clay Pell as an avenue for that. But I think Joe Fleming is absolutely right that it's not clear to me in here how Pell gets from this 25.6% we have him at to 32, 35, 38, whatever it takes to win this primary, because he's so soft among the undecided voters.
What is the magic number?
I think in this race, it's probably going to be about 38, 39% may win this race if the three candidates keep up where they are, unless one of them starts falling way behind.
Okay. I want to bring up another slide, and this is the degree of support where we asked voters if in the next 3 weeks they would be willing to change their mind. For those who said they were voting for Gina Raimondo, 57% of Raimondo supporters are definitely voting for her, while 41% of Tavares voters say they are definitely voting for him, and 41% of Pell voters as well are locked in. Ted, the numbers, when you look deeper at them, obviously Gina Raimondo has solid support, or fairly solid support from her supporters, but when you look deeper at the numbers, Tavares has even softer numbers, doesn't he?
Yeah, no, and I think this is the risk for Angel Tavares, particularly as he has to go negative against the other two, is you see a real gap in it seems like the enthusiasm of his folks who say, I'm not leaving Angel Tavares, I want Angel Tavares to be the governor. Gina Raimondo has more than half her people in this poll saying, absolutely no change, I'm not looking at the other two anymore. Angel Tavares is tied with Clay Pell on how strongly people feel about him, and I think again, it almost makes sense too in the context of we've always seen Angel Taveras with very high, usually the highest favorable ratings in these polls, yet it usually only translates into half that level of support for governor. And people can like you without voting for you. We saw that with Lincoln Chafee in the 2006 U.S. Senate race too. They don't have to dislike you to choose someone else for an office.
And one number that I found interesting in the poll is the question, regardless of who you say you're going to vote for, who do you think is going to win? And in that number, Gina Raimondo, 39%. Angel Taveras, 24.7%. Pell, 13%.
What do you think that sets? I mean, it's a fun question. We were talking about it before the poll,
I'm not
all of us.
entirely
It's sort of a fun question
but
to
I
ask.
think the people who are taking that poll, who are responding to that poll, are thinking about what's going on, and regardless of who they support, they're kind of gauging what they think is actually going to happen.
And we have those numbers
whether that's
on the
accurate or
screen
not,
right now.
we don't know.
There was a former adage, right, that people like to vote for the winner.
Right.
So do you think that's going to have any impact?
Well, this is part of why we asked this question in this poll when the two Tims and I were talking about questions. We've seen in presidential races, granted a very different scenario, that this can often predict who wins because people have a sense, it's almost the wisdom of crowds here. And it's also striking there, Clay Pell getting 26% support in the poll, but only 13% of the people being polled say they actually think he'll win. So plenty of his supporters do not expect Clay Pell to win this primary, which again goes to sort of the feeling they have about whether he can get over the finish line.
Well, with the soft support that Angel and Clay has, that could move the other way. Gina's support, which is so solid, 57%, that's up 12% from the last time we did the survey in May, where Angel's support, solid, only increased by 7%, and Clay Pell's solid support only increased by 3%. So there's a lot of softness there with Angel and Clay's supporters, where Gina's are really solid, and people have the perception. I think she can win. Even though I'm voting for Pell, I'm voting for Angel.
It's like a house. You want to build off a solid foundation.
Right. All right. So September 9th, that's the primary. We have now less than 3 weeks to go. What happens in that time frame, Tim?
Well, a lot of things can happen in 2.5 weeks, but certainly for the candidates, what's going to happen is they have to do everything they can to get their voters to the polls. The ground game, the phone calls, the knocking on doors, the getting the message out. Clay Pell has a pretty formidable operation. More than 40 paid staffers who can go out and knock on doors and hand out the flyers and ask people if they're going to come to vote, work the phones, etc. Both he and Gina Raimondo have the money to do that effective ground game. The question is, does Angel Taveras have the resources to do that?
And there was a big change recently that you reported on in the Taveras camp that could impact the ground game.
Yeah, Dan McGowan and I, again, we're working on this, and he's lost his field director 3 weeks out, 2.5 weeks out. Very field director of the ground game. That's the person in charge of getting those people to polls, managing that crew. Clearly, they're never going to tell us this is a crisis for them, but you'd rather not lose your field director 3 weeks before an election. And then, Angel Taveras, in a way, you got to feel for the guy. It's not that he's unpopular or running a terrible campaign.
Has very high
he just has,
favorability
when you have significantly less resources, for people who worry about money in politics, this is kind of exhibit A, that money makes a huge difference, especially in a primary where people can't vote on party ID. They have to get to know these people by name and have a feeling about them. It's a different sort of election in a primary than a general election.
With the loss of that field manager, all the more then they have to put together really quickly a team from the unions that are backing him to do that grunt work, because it's all going to be about get out the
And
vote.
it's so interesting how the unions are split in this race.
Yes.
You have the NEA for Pell, you've got the private sector trade unions for Raimondo, and then you've got that coalition now of public sector
And the
unions
polling data
largely
shows,
for
data
Angel
shows
Taveras.
exactly that. 31% for Pell, 31% for Angel, 20% for Gina. They're divided.
All right, we have to go to a break, but before we do, Arlene, who has the momentum right now in this race?
Personally, I think it's going to be a photo finish, unless one of them gets in a fist fight with Pope Francis. But I think the momentum is Raimondo.
All right, anybody else want to weigh in on momentum? Joe, what do you think of looking at the numbers?
I think looking at the numbers, the thing to keep in mind is she's not above 33, 34, 35%. She's still at 32, not enough to win. She has some momentum going. She has the resources to get over the finish line. But the question is, can she get that number high enough? Does she have a ceiling among Democratic primary voters?
And there is some irony. I know we got to go to a break, but that Gina Raimondo, who's had a tense relationship with Lincoln Chafee, is in such a similar position to him a few weeks out from the 2010 general election, right? Hanging around 32, pretty strong support among those people, but not building up. Well, he only got a few more points. Someone was close behind him, but he got elected.
All right, when we come back, a couple of things we want to talk about. We have also a Republican primary for governor. That is on the topic list here, but really we're going to start with what I think is probably the most surprising result from our poll, and that is the race for treasurer. Stay with us. You're watching Newsmakers. Welcome back to Newsmakers. I'm Tim White, one of my favorite shows that we do here. It's a political roundtable. To my right, WPRI.com reporter Ted Nesi, Eyewitness News analyst Arlene Violet. We also have Eyewitness News political analyst Joe Fleming, and we're joined by Tim Murphy from the Providence Journal. The topic of conversation is this week we released an exclusive Eyewitness News Providence Journal poll looking at the Democratic primary. The first half was dominated by the governor's race. But one of the races that really stood out from this poll, and it was most surprising to me in the results, was the treasurer's race. Let's take a look at some of those numbers there. Now, keep in mind, the last time we polled this, there was another Democratic candidate in that race, but Frank Caprio was leading. Now we have Seth Magaziner taking the lead at 43%, and down by double digits here. Frank Caprio, former treasurer, at 31%, and the not sure, the people who are undecided, shrank considerably down to 24%. Ted, I was surprised. Were you surprised?
I was surprised. I thought Magaziner would be close, if not slightly ahead. I didn't expect him to have a double-digit lead. And, you know, just last night, we're taping this on Friday, I participated in the Round PBS debate for treasurer, and I actually said to Frank Caprio, there's been a 30-point swing against you in the polls ever since this news of your brother and the beach contracts, David Caprio, which of course Frank Caprio is not involved with, but has happened. And I said, what do you say to voters? And Frank Caprio said, it's not just your poll, it's my internal polls show the same thing. People have turned against me. He said, people have turned against me. I'm the underdog in this race. He didn't say.
Is that the play here? Is he wants to be the underdog?
To be honest, he sounded pretty honest. He didn't say beg, but he was basically pleading with voters, look again at this race, please. I know you're unhappy. You're wondering if you should, he said, I know you're wondering if you should give Frank Caprio another chance to be in the State House because of all this, but please look again. My opponent's record is bad, but he's clearly nervous.
But all right, so that is based in the context of concession gate, that his numbers have dropped considerably.
I thought it was Beachgate.
Oh, is that what we're going with?
I thought we were going with Beachgate.
It is shorter for a hashtag.
Yeah.
But can you really place all the blame on that here with Frank Caprio? Joe, what else was happening?
In politics, it's perception. Everything is perception. And perception is his brother, him, it all ties together. People perceive it that way. They hear the Caprio name. The other thing is, Magazine is running some very strong anti-Caprio commercials, talking about pay to play. And that all plays in with the speech, your Beachgate. So all that ties together. Magazine did everything perfectly at the right time with his ads.
And luck is better than smart.
Yes,
right?
I mean, he was lucky. This other thing happened, and in turn, the poll has shown a remarkable turnaround in this race.
The fresh face message seems to be playing in this race too, because I think people are getting sick of the same old God, etc. And one of the things that Magaziner has is he's got star power coming to town with Clinton, etc. Yep. So I think we talked about momentum earlier. I think this race momentum is all with him.
No question.
And Tim, I don't know if you find it ironic at all, but keep in mind, 2010, Bill Clinton, former president, was here stumping for Frank Caprio.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, there are many ironies in politics, but that certainly is a big one.
And another factor to keep in mind in this race, Ernie Almonte dropped out as a Democrat, and he's now an independent. Is it safe to say all those voters went to Seth Magaziner?
It sure looks like it, and I think the Magaziner people were pretty elated when I talked to them when Almonte dropped out. They thought a two-way race with Caprio, new face, old face, they set up well for them, and that was before the beach concession scandal that's been in the news. So this is set up well. I think Almonte, it's very tough to win as an independent, especially when people don't pay attention. I think the Democratic nomination in this race is very valuable with no Republican nominee. But I do think there will be voters, especially with all this talk about experience in the Democratic primary with Clay Pell. There could be a sizable chunk of voters who aren't sure they want to entrust the 31-year-old Seth Magaziner with the Treasurer's office. So while he will be in great shape if he does manage to beat Frank Caprio and would be the favorite, I do think he's going to have to run a decent campain. The fall convince voters
and raise money. Didn't he blow a lot of money? And obviously it has worked. I shouldn't use the word blow a lot of money, but he spent a lot of money in the last few weeks. Didn't that drain his account?
It did. He's at $35,000 now. But they say, well, yeah, you don't raise this money to save it. You raise this money to spend it and win.
But can Ernie Almonte raise enough money to become viable, or does it get lost in the governor's race and no one even looks at general treasurer?
Yeah, because don't forget, there are going to be people competing with him. I mean, Catherine Taylor is going to be a formidable Republican for lieutenant governor. Dawson Hodgson and Peter Kilmartin, that race is not heated up yet. A governor's race, happening at the top of the ticket.
Right.
So it's hard as an independent, without a full party behind you, et cetera. That's, that'll be challenging for Almonte, but he may be kicking himself a little bit that as Caprio sort of fails to build any more support, he could have had actually maybe a stronger opportunity, but he couldn't have known about the beach scandal.
No.
Tim, do you think it's Magaziner's race to lose at this point?
I think at this point he's definitely got the momentum. He is a young and inexperienced guy, but he presents very well in debates and on TV appearances. He's an articulate guy. He's been able to parry back and forth with a more experienced politician. He's been able to come up with a narrative about lack of experience. Well, I have experience in the investment field. So I think right now I would go with the momentum in his favor.
All right, let's talk about the Republican race for governor. We don't have polling numbers on this race, but what are you hearing here? We talked about momentum in the Democratic race for governor, in the treasurer's race.
The conventional wisdom on this has definitely changed. You see them there, Ken Block and Alan Fung debating on WPRO the other night. And, initially I think plenty of people, including myself, thought Ken Block, he was voting for Obama just 2 years ago. How is he going to convince Republican primary voters back in? But he's run on the issues that Republican primary voters around care about. Fiscal conservatism, fighting with the General Assembly. He had that great coup of being seen as the one who killed the master lever. I mean, he's made a strong pitch there. And Alan Fung, while he's run an okay campaign, I think he's had some real problems. The Cranston news hasn't been so good. This Ohio TV ad, again, it's not necessarily something that voters choose on, but it's another round of negative headlines they didn't need. He's in a real race, and it's so hard to know how many people are going to turn out in that primary.
I've been around long enough to know you don't guess on Republican primaries in Rhode Island, because first, you don't know what the turnout is. It could be 15,000, it could be 40,000. Secondly, we've seen upsets. Lincoln Almond beat Ron Makeley in Rhode Island. Even Don Carcieri beating Bennett, where Bennett was the endorsed candidate.
Yep.
So it all depends on who comes out to vote. If Alan Fung can get big turnouts in Cranston or Warwick, that could benefit him big time.
Arlene, you posed an interesting question prior to the taping of this show. Does a high independent turnout in the Democratic primary hurt any of the candidates in the Republican race? Explain what you meant by that.
Well, usually independents do want to have an impact, but as they look at the race, particularly between Raimondo and her contenders, and she's leading with independents, do they want to go with her? There's many compelling reasons, theoretically, first woman elected, that they might want to do that. On the other hand, I also feel that they feel they can have an impact in the Fung block race, but they only can go into one. So I think there will be some significant impact on the Republican race because I think more independents will now gravitate to the Democratic primary.
So who does it?
I think it hurts Block. I know you disagree with me, right? You think it hurts Fung.
Joe disagrees.
You disagree with me that it hurts Fung, but I think the independents, first of all, they don't like voting and looking like Republicans to start with. So if they go into that particular race, I think they're going to the person that...
Was that some bitterness as a former Republican candidate?
No, I was very happy that they came to my race, believe me.
The reason I say that is I think Alan Fung is looked at as more of a moderate to liberal type Republican, and Ken Block has really tried to build up the fact that he's more conservative. Even though he voted for Obama, he still is more in line with the conservative Republicans. And in a small turnout, that's what you want to get. Both of them are trying to tout their conservatives.
Right.
Whoever wins that battle can win the race.
I also think that Ken Block has the experience of having run in a gubernatorial campaign before, and I think he's become a much more effective campaigner than he was 4 years ago.
Yeah, but looking then at the independents, though, that are going into that race, I don't think they like the fact that Fung keeps hitting on Obamacare and all that business. They want those issues. And if they don't come into the race that Block is talking about and what really are the issues, and they go into the other, those are votes that he's going to lose.
And that's true. You don't know where the independent voters are going to go on September 9th.
And one interesting thing that isn't being discussed too much in this race or in the Democratic primaries, who's the party's better option against, for one thing, you don't know who the other candidate will be in either case, so it's harder to tell the matchup. But, the Republicans, it's a Democratic state. Yes, Republicans have won most of the gubernatorial elections the last few decades, but no doubt Angel Taveras and Gina Raimondo coming in with strong favorables, Clay Pell a bit weaker. Perhaps the Republicans would rather draw Pell into that, but then I'm not sure Alan Fung versus Ken Block, which one would be the better candidate against the Democrat come the fall.
All right, we're running out of time. I think we have a little bit of time to look at some of the down ballot races that we pulled as well. Let's start with the lieutenant governor's race. Keep in mind Elizabeth Roberts, our current lieutenant governor, is leaving because of term limits. So we decided to poll the Democratic primary in the lieutenant governor's race. The candidates there are Ralph Mollis, Dan McKee, and Frank Ferry. Here are the results. 25% of those say the current Secretary of State, Ralph Mollis, has their vote. Cumberland Mayor Dan McKee gets 15%, followed by State Representative Frank Ferry with 10%. But the big number here is not sure, it's not on the screen, but I can tell you it's 47% of the people haven't made up their mind in this race yet. Boy, this one has been in the shadows of the governor's race.
Definitely, and one key word, or two words, no TV.
Yeah.
Without TV, you don't get yourself known. As a result, no one knows who's running.
With less than a minute left, let's talk about the Secretary of State's race, or at least bring up the results on that. And if you thought the undecideds were high in this one, wait till you see the one in the Secretary of State's race. And we have two candidates here, Guillaume de Ramel and Nelly Gorbea. The results, 27% of those polled said they would give their vote to de Ramel, 13% for Nelly Gorbea. Whopping 57% say they aren't sure. Ted, in 20 seconds.
I talked to a down ballot candidate who said the hardest thing about these races is nobody cares. And it's going to, I think, in both those cases, to the extent that people aren't paying attention, unlike the Caprio race, those folks, de Ramel starting ahead, Maul starting ahead, that's good for them.
All results are online. You can catch them on WPRI.com. Ted Nesi, Arlene Violet, Joe Fleming, and Tim Murphy, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank
we
you.
thank you for watching. We'll see you next week on Newsmakers. Good. So I think we...